Months passed, and the village settled into a fragile sense of normalcy. Thomas worked tirelessly, his once stoic demeanor softened by humility and quiet determination. He attended community gatherings, helped repair the old church roof, and even began teaching children how to tend vegetable gardens. The villagers, though still wary, couldn't deny the change in him. Slowly, they began to see him not as the man who had broken every rule, but as someone trying to make peace with his mistakes. Emily, meanwhile, found herself in a bustling city far from the mountains she'd called home. At first, the noise and crowds overwhelmed her, but over time, she grew accustomed to the rhythm of urban life. She took a job at a small cafe, where the owner, a kind woman named Clara, became something of a mentor to her. Clara listened patiently as Emily shared fragments of her story, offering advice without judgment. "You can't rewrite the past," Clara often said, "but you can decide what comes next." During her days off, Emily searched for answers about her biological father. Armed with the documents the lawyer had provided, she traced his name to a nearby town. Her heart raced as she stood outside his modest house one afternoon, unsure if she was ready to face him. Finally, gathering her courage, she knocked on the door. A tall man with graying hair answered, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw her. "Emily?" he asked hesitantly, as if afraid to believe it. When she nodded, tears filled his eyes. "I've waited so long for this moment," he whispered, pulling her into an awkward but heartfelt embrace. Over coffee, he explained everything. How he'd been young and penniless when Emily's mother left him, how he'd spent years searching for her after learning of her adoption, and how he'd never stopped hoping to reunite with his daughter. His sincerity touched Emily deeply, filling a void she hadn't realized existed. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of belonging. Yet, as much as she appreciated finally knowing her roots, Emily couldn't shake the memories of Thomas or the bond they'd shared. Their connection wasn't just blood. It was years of laughter, struggles, and unconditional support. No matter how complicated it was, she knew she couldn't erase it entirely. One evening, while walking through the city park, Emily received a letter from Thomas. It was brief but heartfelt, updating her on life in the village and expressing how proud he was of her courage. "I miss you more than words can say," he wrote, "but I'm glad you're finding your own path. Remember, I'll always be here if you need me." The letter brought tears to her eyes, stirring emotions she tried to bury. She realized that running away hadn't solved anything. It had only given her space to heal. Now she needed closure, not just for herself, but for Thomas too. After weeks of deliberation, Emily decided to visit the village. When she stepped off the train, her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The familiar sights, the rolling hills, the narrow dirt roads, the scent of pine trees, felt both comforting and surreal. As she approached their home, she saw Thomas sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up, startled, then broke into a wide smile. "Welcome back," he said simply, standing to meet her. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their separate journeys. Emily told him about meeting her biological father and discovering parts of herself she hadn't known before. Thomas listened intently, nodding occasionally but saying little. When she finished, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you for coming back," he said softly. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful." From that day forward, their relationship shifted. They weren't father and daughter anymore, not in the traditional sense, but they weren't strangers either. They became two people bound by history, learning to redefine their connection in healthier ways. Though scars remained, they chose to focus on healing rather than regret. In time, the villagers noticed the change in them. Gone was the tension that had once surrounded their household, replaced by a quiet harmony. Life moved on, as it always does, leaving behind lessons about love, forgiveness, and the complexities of family. And though their journey had been messy and painful, Thomas and Emily emerged stronger, not because they had all the answers, but because they were brave enough to keep asking questions. The days that followed the disastrous wedding attempt were some of the hardest either Thomas or Emily had ever faced. Their once close bond now felt fragile, like a thread stretched too thin, ready to snap at any moment. They moved through their small home in silence, avoiding eye contact and speaking only when necessary. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words, guilt, and confusion. Emily spent most of her time packing. She had made up her mind. She needed to leave the village, not just to escape the judgmental stares of the townsfolk, but to find clarity away from the tangled web of emotions that surrounded her relationship with Thomas. Every item she placed into her bag seemed to weigh more than it should, as if the gravity of her decision pressed down on even the smallest belongings. Thomas watched her quietly, his heart breaking with each passing hour. He wanted to beg her to stay, to explain that he couldn't bear the thought of losing her again. But what could he say? How could he justify asking her to remain when everything they'd believed about their connection had been turned upside down? Instead, he busied himself with chores around the house, trying to distract himself from the impending emptiness her departure would leave behind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, Emily sat on the porch steps, staring out at the fields they tended together for years. Thomas joined her after a while, hesitating before sitting down beside her. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Do you hate me?" Thomas finally asked, his voice barely audible. It was a question that had haunted him since the lawyer's revelation, though he hadn't dared to voice it until now. Emily shook her head slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "No," she whispered, "I don't hate you. I could never hate you, but I don't know who we are anymore. Everything feels wrong, even things that used to feel right." Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand," he said, though the words tasted bitter. "If leaving is what you need to do, then I won't stop you. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" Emily asked, turning to look at him. "That no matter where you go or what happens, you'll remember that I love you. Not as your father, or whatever people think I am, but as someone who would give anything to see you happy." Emily's breath hitched, and she quickly looked away, unable to meet his gaze. His words stirred something deep within her, a mix of gratitude, sadness, and longing. She wanted to believe that their love could survive this storm, but she wasn't sure if it was worth risking further pain for either of them. The next morning, Emily woke early, careful not to disturb Thomas. She slipped on her coat, slung her packed bag over her shoulder, and stepped outside into the crisp dawn air. The village was still asleep, its streets deserted and eerily quiet. As she walked toward the train station, memories flooded her mind. Childhood laughter echoing through the fields, late-night conversations by the fire, and the countless moments that had shaped her life here. When she reached the platform, she found Thomas waiting for her. He must have guessed she'd leave without saying goodbye. He stood awkwardly, holding a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "For the journey," he said simply, handing it to her. Inside were a loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a few coins he'd managed to save. Emily hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." Thomas held her close, memorizing the feel of her in his arms. When the train whistle blew in the distance, signaling its approach, he reluctantly let her go. "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And don't forget, you'll always have a home here, no matter what." As the train pulled into the station, Emily climbed aboard, glancing back at Thomas one last time. He waved, forcing a smile despite the ache in his chest. Watching the train disappear into the horizon, he felt a profound sense of loss, but also a flicker of hope. Perhaps this separation was exactly what they needed to heal and rediscover who they truly were. Back in the village, Thomas threw himself into rebuilding his life. He began working longer hours in the fields, helping neighbors repair fences and clear debris. Slowly, cautiously, the villagers started to soften toward him. Some even offered kind words or shared meals, sensing his genuine effort to make amends. Though he missed Emily desperately, he found solace in the routine of daily life, and in the possibility that someday she might return. Meanwhile, Emily embarked on a journey of self-discovery, determined to untangle the threads of her past and forge a new path forward. Little did she know, the choices she would make in the coming months would bring her closer to understanding not. The clearing remained eerily silent after the lawyer's words sank in. The villagers, who moments earlier had been shouting accusations and threats, now stood frozen, unsure how to react. Their anger wavered as they processed the revelation that Emily wasn't Thomas's biological daughter. While the news didn't erase the immorality of their actions or the years of inappropriate closeness, it cast everything in a new light. For Thomas and Emily, however, the truth brought no relief, only confusion and heartache. Emily sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, her head in her hands. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Who was her real father? Why had he given her up? And why had her mother kept this secret from Thomas all these years? Most importantly, what did it mean for her relationship with the man she'd always called Dad? She felt like a stranger in her own life, untethered from everything familiar. Thomas, meanwhile, paced back and forth, his face pale and drawn. He ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath as if trying to piece together fragments of a shattered puzzle. How could Sarah have hidden such a monumental truth from him? Had she feared he wouldn't love Emily as much if he knew she wasn't his blood? Or had she believed keeping the adoption a secret was the only way to protect them both? Why didn't she tell me? Thomas finally blurted out, turning to the lawyer. His voice cracked with emotion. All these years, I thought she was mine. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, but offered no comfort. Your late wife likely had her reasons, he said evenly. Perhaps she feared judgment or complications. Regardless, the past cannot be changed. What matters now is how you move forward. Move forward. The phrase echoed in Emily's mind, but it felt impossible. How could she possibly navigate this tangled web of emotions? She loved Thomas, not just as a father figure, but as someone who had shaped every aspect of her existence. Yet now, knowing they weren't bound by blood didn't make their relationship any less complicated. In some ways, it made things worse. If they weren't related, then what were they? Friends? Lovers? Something else entirely. Sarah approached Emily cautiously, kneeling beside her. I'm so sorry, she whispered, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. I had no idea about any of this. I swear, if I'd known. Her voice trailed off, heavy with regret. Emily nodded weakly, unable to summon the energy to respond. She appreciated Sarah's kindness, but nothing could undo the turmoil inside her. The villagers began to disperse slowly, their earlier outrage giving way to awkward murmurs and sideways glances. Some lingered, watching curiously, while others left altogether, unwilling to witness whatever came next. As the crowd thinned, Father Gregory stepped forward, clutching his leather-bound book tightly. This is not my place to judge, he said softly, addressing Thomas and Emily. But perhaps this is a sign, a chance to reflect and seek guidance. Whatever path you choose, may it lead you toward healing. He turned and walked away, leaving the couple alone once more. The forest, which had seemed so serene earlier, now felt oppressive, its shadows looming over them like silent witnesses to their unraveling lives. That night, back at their small home, Emily and Thomas sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the flickering candlelight casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts and unresolved feelings. Finally, Emily broke the quiet. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. I don't know, he admitted, but we can't keep living like this. Not after today. Emily nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes again. Maybe, Maybe I should leave, she suggested hesitantly. Go somewhere far away. Start fresh. Thomas stiffened, panic flashing across his face. No, he said firmly. I won't let you go. Not again. We'll figure this out, together. His words hung in the air, filled with desperation and longing. But even as he spoke, Emily felt a growing distance between them, a chasm widened by secrets, misunderstandings, and the undeniable truth that their lives would never be the same. For now, they clung to each other, two lost souls adrift in a sea of uncertainty. But deep down, they both knew one thing for sure. The road ahead would test them in ways neither could have imagined. The clearing remained eerily silent after the lawyer's words sank in. The villagers, who moments earlier had been shouting accusations and threats, now stood frozen, unsure how to react. Their anger wavered as they processed the revelation that Emily wasn't Thomas's biological daughter. While the news didn't erase the immorality of their actions, or the years of inappropriate closeness, it cast everything in a new light. For Thomas and Emily, however, the truth brought no relief, only confusion and heartache. Emily sat on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, her head in her hands. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Who was her real father? Why had he given her up? And why had her mother kept this secret from Thomas all these years? Most importantly, what did it mean for her relationship with the man she'd always called Dad? She felt like a stranger in her own life, untethered from everything familiar. Thomas, meanwhile, paced back and forth, his face pale and drawn. He ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath as if trying to piece together fragments of a shattered puzzle. How could Sarah have hidden such a monumental truth from him? Had she feared he wouldn't love Emily as much if he knew she wasn't his blood? Or had she believed keeping the adoption a secret was the only way to protect them both? Why didn't she tell me? Thomas finally blurted out, turning to the lawyer. His voice cracked with emotion. All these years, I thought she was mine. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, but offered no comfort. Your late wife likely had her reasons, he said evenly. Perhaps she feared judgment or complications. Regardless, the past cannot be changed. What matters now is how you move forward. Move forward. The phrase echoed in Emily's mind, but it felt impossible. How could she possibly navigate this tangled web of emotions? She loved Thomas, not just as a father figure, but as someone who had shaped every aspect of her existence. Yet now, knowing they weren't bound by blood didn't make their relationship any less complicated. In some ways, it made things worse. If they weren't related, then what were they? Friends? Lovers? Something else entirely. Sarah approached Emily cautiously, kneeling beside her. I'm so sorry, she whispered, placing a gentle hand on Emily's shoulder. I had no idea about any of this. I swear, if I'd known. Her voice trailed off, heavy with regret. Emily nodded weakly, unable to summon the energy to respond. She appreciated Sarah's kindness, but nothing could undo the turmoil inside her. The villagers began to disperse slowly, their earlier outrage giving way to awkward murmurs and sideways glances. Some lingered, watching curiously, while others left altogether, unwilling to witness whatever came next. As the crowd thinned, Father Gregory stepped forward, clutching his leather-bound book tightly. This is not my place to judge, he said softly, addressing Thomas and Emily. But perhaps this is a sign, a chance to reflect and seek guidance. Whatever path you choose, may it lead you toward healing. He turned and walked away, leaving the couple alone once more. The forest, which had seemed so serene earlier, now felt oppressive, its shadows looming over them like silent witnesses to their unraveling lives. That night, back at their small home, Emily and Thomas sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the flickering candlelight casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts and unresolved feelings. Finally, Emily broke the quiet. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we can't keep living like this. Not after today." Emily nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes again. Maybe I should leave," she suggested hesitantly. "Go somewhere far away. Start fresh." Thomas stiffened, panic flashing across his face. "No," he said firmly. "I won't let you go. Not again. We'll figure this out, together." His words hung in the air, filled with desperation and longing. But even as he spoke, Emily felt a growing distance between them, a chasm widened by secrets, misunderstandings, and the undeniable truth that their lives would never be the same. For now, they clung to each other, two lost souls adrift in a sea of uncertainty. But deep down, they both knew one thing for sure. The road ahead would test them in ways neither could have imagined. The clearing erupted into chaos as the villagers surrounded Thomas and Emily, their shouts overlapping in a cacophony of anger and disbelief. Sarah stood at the forefront, her face red with emotion, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How could you betray us like this?" she cried, her voice trembling with hurt. "You're supposed to protect her, Thomas. Not this." Thomas instinctively stepped in front of Emily, shielding her from the hostile crowd. His jaw tightened as he glared at the villagers, his protective instincts kicking in. "Stay back," he barked, his voice firm but laced with desperation. "This is none of your business." "Oh, it's our business now," another villager shouted, a burly man named Jacob who rarely spoke but always carried an air of authority. "What kind of monster are you, Thomas? Marrying your own daughter? Do you even hear yourself?" Emily clutched her bouquet so tightly that the stems began to crumble in her hands. She wanted to disappear, to sink into the earth, and vanish forever. The weight of the villagers' stares was suffocating, and their words cut deeper than any blade. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a part of her felt numb, as if she were watching the scene unfold from far away. Just when it seemed the confrontation would escalate further, a new figure appeared on the edge of the clearing. It was a stranger, a tall, lean man dressed in a dark suit that looked out of place among the rustic surroundings. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. The villagers turned to him, momentarily distracted by his unexpected presence. "Who are you?" Jacob demanded, narrowing his eyes suspiciously. The man ignored the question and instead addressed Thomas and Emily directly. "I'm here on behalf of an anonymous client," he said, his tone measured and professional. "I've been instructed to deliver some information that may be relevant to you both." Thomas frowned. Confusion etched across his face. "What are you talking about? We don't need any." But the man cut him off, opening his briefcase and pulling out a stack of papers. "These documents concern Emily's parentage," he explained, holding them up for everyone to see. "They reveal that she is not, in fact, your biological daughter." A stunned silence fell over the clearing. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Emily's knees buckled, and she stumbled backward, clutching at Thomas's arm for support. What do you mean?" she stammered, her voice barely audible. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and continued. "According to these records, Emily was adopted shortly after her birth. Her biological mother placed her in your care under the condition that her true identity remain hidden. It appeared she feared societal judgment and wanted to give Emily a stable home without complications." Thomas stared at the papers, his mind reeling. He thought back to the day Emily had come into his life, how Sarah, his late wife, had insisted they keep the adoption a secret. At the time, he'd assumed it was simply because she didn't want anyone questioning their ability to raise a child. Now he realized there was far more to the story. The villagers murmured amongst themselves, their outrage momentarily replaced by shock. Sarah stepped forward, her expression softening as she looked at Emily. "Is this true?" she asked gently, her earlier hostility giving way to concern. Emily nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. She felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, leaving her unsteady and disoriented. Everything she thought she knew about herself and about Thomas was suddenly called into question. Thomas sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the revelation. All this time, he whispered, his voice breaking, "I never knew." The lawyer cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to him. "There's more," he said gravely. "Emily's biological father is still alive. He lives in another town and has been searching for her for years. My client believes it's only a matter of time before he finds her." The news hit like a second wave of shock. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Who was her real father? Why had he given her up? And what did this mean for her future? As the weight of the truth settled over them, the villagers exchanged uneasy glances. The situation was no longer black and white. While their initial outrage hadn't vanished completely, it was tempered by uncertainty. What right did they have to judge when the very foundation of the couple's relationship had been built on a lie? For Thomas and Emily, however, the revelation changed everything and nothing. Their bond, once thought to defy nature, was now technically permissible. But the damage had already been done. Could they rebuild their lives together, or apart, in light of this bombshell? Only time would tell. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and clear, with sunlight streaming through the dense canopy of trees in the forest clearing where Thomas and Emily had chosen to exchange their vows. The air was thick with anticipation, but not the kind that usually accompanies a joyous occasion. Instead, it carried an undercurrent of unease, a quiet tension that seemed to press down on everything. Emily stood at the edge of the clearing, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked earlier that day. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the fabric of her simple white dress, which she had stitched together from scraps of old cloth. She tried to focus on the beauty of the moment, the soft rustle of leaves overhead, the faint scent of pine in the air, but her mind kept drifting back to the enormity of what they were about to do. Was this really happening? Could she go through with it? Thomas waited for her under a makeshift arch adorned with ivy and daisies. He wore his best shirt, freshly washed and ironed, though it still bore signs of wear along the cuffs. His face was pale, but his eyes shone with determination. He glanced nervously toward the narrow path leading into the clearing, half expecting someone, anyone, to burst through the trees and stop them. But no one came. For now, they were alone. Father Gregory arrived shortly after, hobbling slowly with the aid of a wooden cane. His weathered face betrayed little emotion as he took his place beneath the arch. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly, looking between Thomas and Emily. "Once we begin, there's no turning back." Thomas nodded firmly, while Emily hesitated before giving a small, uncertain nod. Father Gregory sighed deeply, muttering something under his breath about forgiveness, then opened his worn leather book and began reciting the traditional words of the ceremony. As Emily walked toward Thomas, her heart pounded so loudly she feared everyone could hear it. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was resisting her movement. When she finally reached him, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, all the fear and doubt melted away. In that fleeting instant, they were just two people who loved each other deeply, bound by a connection neither fully understood. But the peace didn't last long. Just as Father Gregory instructed them to join hands, a sudden commotion erupted from the edge of the clearing. Shouts echoed through the trees, followed by the sound of snapping branches and hurried footsteps. Before Thomas or Emily could react, a group of villagers burst into view, led by Sarah. Their faces were flushed with anger, their eyes blazing with righteous fury. "How dare you?" Sarah screamed, pointing an accusing finger at Thomas. "How could you do this to her? To all of us?" The villagers surged forward, surrounding the couple and cutting off any chance of escaping. The days following Thomas's confession were filled with tension and uncertainty. Emily found herself unable to focus on anything else, her mind replaying his words over and over again. She wandered through their small home like a ghost, avoiding eye contact with him whenever possible. Yet, despite her efforts to distance herself emotionally, she couldn't ignore the weight of what he had said or the strange pull she felt toward him. At first, Emily tried to convince herself that this was all some sort of misunderstanding. Maybe her father had been under too much stress or had misinterpreted his feelings for her. But deep down, she knew better. The way he looked at her, the way he spoke to her, it wasn't just the gaze of a proud parent. It was something deeper, more intense, and it frightened her as much as it intrigued her. As the days passed, Emily began to reflect on their relationship. She remembered how fiercely protective Thomas had always been, how he went out of his way to make sure she was happy and comfortable. He had sacrificed so much for her, working long hours in the fields and denying himself even the simplest pleasures so she could have everything she needed. In many ways, he had been her entire world. And now, faced with the reality of his feelings, she wondered if perhaps she had unknowingly encouraged this shift in their bond. But no matter how hard she tried to justify it, one fact remained undeniable. Their love, if it could even be called that, was wrong. Society would never accept it. The villagers, who already whispered behind their backs, would surely turn against them completely. Even the thought of leaving the village crossed her mind. But where would they go? Who would understand? Despite these fears, Emily couldn't bring herself to reject Thomas outright. There was a part of her, a small, hidden corner of her heart, that felt drawn to him in return. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest whenever he smiled at her or touched her hand. Was it love, or was it simply years of dependency manifesting itself in confusing ways? She didn't know, and the not knowing made her feel trapped. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Thomas approached Emily cautiously. "We can't keep living like this," he said softly, his voice tinged with desperation. "People are talking, Emily. They'll never stop unless we do something about it." Emily frowned, looking up at him with a mixture of anger and sadness. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Thomas hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "We leave this place," he said finally. "Together. We start over somewhere far away from here, where no one knows us. No judgment, no whispers, just us." For a moment, Emily was speechless. The idea of running away with her father, of abandoning everything familiar, felt both terrifying and liberating. On one hand, it offered a chance to escape the suffocating judgment of the villagers. On the other hand, it meant crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. What people will think?" Emily stammered, her voice barely audible. Thomas shook his head firmly. "I don't care what they think anymore," he replied. "All I care about is you. If we stay here, they'll tear us apart. Is that what you want?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to respond. She wanted to scream, to tell him that none of this was right, that they were playing with fire. But instead, she nodded slowly, her resolve crumbling under the weight of her conflicted emotions. Over the next few weeks, they made plans in secret. They sold off whatever they could spare, packed only the essentials, and saved every coin they earned. At night, when the house was quiet, they whispered about their future together. They dreamed of a new life in a distant town, where they could live freely without fear of condemnation. Yet, even as they prepared to leave, guilt gnawed at Emily's conscience. She knew they were making a decision that would change everything, not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. Still, the promise of freedom and the hope of finding peace kept her moving forward. Little did they know, their journey was far from over. What lay ahead would test them in ways neither of them could have imagined. But for now, they clung to each other, blinded by love and driven by desperation, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. In a quiet, forgotten village, surrounded by towering mountains and dense forests, life moved at its own unhurried pace. The air was crisp, the roads were dusty, and everyone knew each other's secrets, or so they thought. Among the villagers lived Thomas, a man in his late 40s who had spent most of his life caring for his daughter, Emily. Her mother, Sarah, had passed away when Emily was just a toddler, leaving Thomas to raise her alone. Over the years, he became both father and mother to Emily, pouring all his love and energy into raising her. Emily grew up to be a kind-hearted young woman with striking features, long brown hair, bright eyes, and a smile that could light up even the gloomiest days. She helped her father around the house, tended to their small garden, and occasionally joined him on trips to the market. To an outsider, theirs seemed like a typical father-daughter relationship, but beneath the surface, something unusual brewed. As Emily entered adulthood, their bond began to shift in ways neither of them fully understood. Thomas adored Emily more than anything in the world. He admired her strength, cherished her laughter, and found solace in her presence. But as time went on, his feelings deepened beyond what a father should feel for his child. At first, he tried to ignore these emotions, dismissing them as natural pride or affection. However, the more he fought against them, the stronger they grew. Meanwhile, Emily, unaware of her father's inner turmoil, relied on him completely. She trusted him implicitly and leaned on him during difficult times, never questioning the intensity of his devotion. The villagers, however, weren't blind to the closeness between Thomas and Emily. Gossip spread quickly in such a small community, and soon whispers filled the air whenever the two were seen together. Some claimed their relationship was inappropriate. Others shook their heads disapprovingly, calling it unnatural. Despite the rumors, no one dared confront them directly. After all, Thomas was known for his temper, and Emily was beloved by many. One chilly evening, after finishing dinner, Thomas sat across from Emily at their worn wooden table. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on the walls, creating an atmosphere heavy with unspoken words. Emily noticed the faraway look in her father's eyes and asked softly, "Is something wrong?" Thomas hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edge of the table. He took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Emily," he began, "there's something I need to tell you." His confession came out in fragments, each word weighing heavily on his conscience. He admitted that his feelings for her weren't just those of a protective father. They were deeper, more profound, and entirely forbidden. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She stared at him, unsure whether to cry, scream, or run away. Confusion clouded her mind as she struggled to process what she'd just heard. Was this real? Could her father truly feel this way about her? And if so, how was she supposed to respond? As the night wore on, Emily wrestled with her own emotions. Part of her felt betrayed, while another part couldn't deny the undeniable connection they shared. Though shocked and disturbed, she realized she wasn't entirely repulsed by his admission. Instead, she felt torn between morality and the intense bond they'd built over the years. Little did she know, this moment would set off a chain of events that would change their lives and the entire village forever.